any of us could be torn to shreds in a negotiation if we collapse at the first hurdle. No, this is all sort of bluster and bravado from the EU fanatics, and they're actually finding themselves now in a slightly weaker position. So Tusk says we can have a Canada-style trade deal. And now, albeit a bit later, we say, all right, we'd like a Canada-style free trade deal. And the reason we can't have it is because of our close geographical proximity. I mean, the whole thing's a joke. It's ridiculous. Utterly ridiculous. Now, if they want to dig in and be ludicrous and demand back the Elgin marbles and all of our fisheries, I mean, frankly, there comes a point where we just have to walk away. And I'm not scared of that in any way at all. Even if walking away led to a short-term disruption, I still think, I coined the phrase back in 2016, no deal is better than a bad deal. And that applies today just as much as it did then. Do you know, the speech by David Frost, our chief negotiator, I was so impressed that I carry a copy around with me now. Because what amazed me was the opening sentence. We bring to the negotiations not some clever tactical positioning, but the fundamentals of what it means to be an independent country. Hooray! Amazing. I mean, that, you know, I helped form the UK Independence Party back in 1993. For me, all of this was about us becoming an independent country, making our own decisions, choosing our own friends, and being the masters of our own destiny. And I thought that speech. Now, I have to be slightly careful because I was taken in a bit by Theresa May with her Lancaster House speech in early 2017. And of course, she then did the opposite of everything she promised. But I do actually think that the British government has now set out its position. And whilst there may be a few compromises around the edges, there won't be compromises on the fundamentals. And I tell you something, they're beginning to look a bit silly. They're beginning to look a bit silly. And they're also, and I noticed this on my last day in Brussels, it was the first time I'd felt for 3.5 years that they were more scared of us than we are of them. And I think you're going to begin to hear voices of German industry, other countries too, screaming at their governments and at the European Commission, you know, for goodness sake, grow up. Because if we do go into some sort of a trade war, it's going to hurt them more than it's going to hurt us. The withdrawal agreement that Boris brought back from Brussels was not Brexit. It's a shocking document because of the kinds of commitments it makes. What has happened since then, and this is one of the reasons Brussels are upset, but what has happened since then is Boris has added these different layers. Number one, no extension beyond the end of 2020. Whatever happens, transition ends. All right, the document gives provision for it to go on to the end of 2022. But the key one is that document was trying to tie us into all areas, made it pretty clear in Article 77 of the political declaration that we'd have to be aligned in everything, even taxation, you know, would have to be at a level that they approve. And Boris has blown a hole in that, completely blown a hole in that by saying no regulatory alignment. You know, we will be independent and make our own decisions. And of course, they come back in this country and say it means cutting standards. But actually, it doesn't mean that. It means being free and flexible. So, I mean, let's be clear. You know, on the deal struck in Brussels, we would have stood against them across the whole country, and I would have rubbished. I'd have done my best to rubbish the entire campaign. Mercifully, I didn't have to do that because they made these commitments. And do you know what? They've stuck to these commitments, and it's all there in David Frost's speech. So right at the moment, on the European question, the government are doing everything absolutely right. Let's hope they stick to it. I mean, for goodness sake, one of the key points of Brexit is to make us free to re-establish the great potential relationships that we have around the world. And you know, in the Commonwealth, if you add in America, there's 2.7 billion people living in those countries, many of them with the fastest growing economies of the world, unlike the sluggish Italian, French, and now even German economies. So at every level, you know, I would love to see Boris in Australia and certainly in Washington, DC. The very fact that Priti Patel said, we're going to have a points-based system. I mean, crikey, I've been saying that in every other sentence since 2004. Good, that's progress, real progress. The fact that it's going to be non-discriminatory across the globe, again, every single election campaign I fought for UKIP, goodness knows, they were every year with local elections, general elections, European elections, and I always campaigned for that. Treat people equally from across the world, don't discriminate against Australia in favour of Romania. Doesn't make any sense. That's good. The fact that freedom of movement is going to end next year, that's good. So all of that is fantastic. Now, when it comes to the detail, I'm about to be very critical. But we are having a conversation in this country about our immigration policy. So even before I start my criticisms, get into context that we're now getting into normal politics where we have these debates. No, as it is, the way the point system has been set, the way the salary level for those that can come in has been set, I think will mean that the numbers that come to the UK from outside the EU will be even higher than they are today, and perhaps quite considerably higher. I think, does it take back control? Yes. Does it exercise that control properly? I suspect not. And I think they're going to have to change the bar. I used to see Barnier regularly. Now, I'm sure they're missing me terribly, by the way. But I did, on the 8th of January 2017, have a formal meeting with Barnier in his office, with his team, and I took my lawyer with my Brussels lawyer with me, very clever guy, and we spent a couple of hours with him. And I realised after I left that meeting that much as his door was open to all the Remainers, Lord Adonis and everybody else, actually forcing a second referendum was not really Barnier's priority. I think he's too cute to think that that tactic actually would have worked in this country. I mean, they might have forced one upon us, but he did not think the Brits would change their mind. What he was desperate to do was to keep us trapped inside the customs union and inside the single market. He doesn't like competition. He wants us all to have the same regulations, the same tax rates, the same currency. Everything is to be the same. It is an updated form of Marxist socialism. That's exactly what it is. Far from being competitive and being good for the economy, it's anti-competitive in so many ways. It cuts us off from much of the rest of the world. And he was determined that the UK did not get competitive advantage. And as a lifelong Brexiteer, I'm determined that the UK does get competitive advantage in a modern 21st century global economy. And that's what the fight's going to be over the next few months. And if Brussels realise that Boris is not bluffing, and let's hope that he's not, then they're going to face a choice. They're going to face a choice. Either they come to us and we negotiate sensibly something, and we keep talking about Canada, but a sensible trade arrangement, or we have to go on WTO terms. I was amused by one thing, and I'll finish on this, and that was last week. It was the first Strasbourg session of the European Parliament that I'd missed since 1999. And there were two press reports I looked at, one from Sky News and one from the Wall Street Journal. And both said the debate was very poorly attended and that it didn't constitute a debate at all, because all that happened were people stood up, read out statements, all basically agreeing with each other that Brexit was awful and Brexit was a disaster. And I thought, you know what? They're missing me already. Because at least when I was there with the Brexit Party, there was a proper debate and people turned up and it was lively and it was interesting. I think ironically, I think I was one of the best things that ever happened to the European Parliament, because my being there meant that people actually watched the blooming thing and took some interest in what was going on. And now it's gone back to being a dull nothingness.